chosen to do something for themselves. I advise
Good
most
evening,
people
Earth.
with
This is
serious
Adam Sturch
medical
broadcasting
conditions.
from the Mushroom Mansion
There's
Taos, New
probably
Mexico,
something out of balance
working on
if you
oil
do not
painting
feel
contact.
guilty. They're still putting their
Tonight I'm just going to
needs,
render up
emotions, interests
the
last.
central purple
The
figure,
power of negative
or
thinking could permit people to
right-handed
welcome their
purple
guilt
figure,
rather than
a little
shun
bit
it.
on the hornet,
I feel
and
guilty.
then
It
I'm
could
going
say,
to
"Wonderful.
do a
Hallelujah.
slightly
It means I must
translucent
have done something right.
petal
Acted on my own
aura
behalf.
around the
Change.
existing rather opaque light
The
yellow
biggest thing is
petal
the control
aura on the
factor.
central sunflower.
Ed said about his
And what
wife
else did I have
Jean's
lined up?
solicitous
Little
mother
hornet
and
detail. I've got some
I
black
resent
and some
him.
gray mixed up to do some
How does
shine
he deal
on
with
the
it?
hornet
I hide it.
exoskeleton.
The power
And
of negative
what
thinking
else?
could
I think
enable
that's about
Ed
it for
to
the moment.
accept
So
the
here we go.
guilt of asserting himself against his wife's interference with his personal decisions, no matter how well meant. A therapist once said to me, "If you face the choice between feeling guilt and resentment, choose the guilt every time." It is wisdom I have passed on to many others since. If a refusal saddles you with guilt, while consent leaves resentment in its wake, opt for the guilt. Resentment is soul suicide. Negative thinking allows us to gaze unflinchingly on our own behalf at what does not work. We have seen in study after study that compulsive positive thinkers are more likely to develop disease and less likely to survive. Genuine positive thinking, or more deeply, positive being, empowers us to know that we have nothing to fear from truth. Health is not just a matter of thinking happy thoughts, writes the molecular researcher Candace Pert. Sometimes the biggest impetus to healing can come from jump-starting the immune system with a burst of long-suppressed anger. Anger, or the healthy experience of it, is one of the 7 A's of healing. Each of the 7 A's addresses one of the embedded visceral beliefs that predispose to illness and undermine healing. We look at them in our Chapter 19, The 7 A's of Healing. Both the onset of malignant melanoma and the body's ability to survive it involve the immune system. Despite the potentially fatal prognosis, there are many recorded cases of spontaneous remission in this disease. The cancer disappears without medical treatment. Although it accounts for only 1% of all cancers, malignant melanoma provides for 11% of spontaneous cancer remissions. The journal Cancer reported a case of spontaneous healing in a 74-year-old man. His cancer was found in a suspicious-looking mole removed from his chest wall in 1965. He experienced a recurrence 7 years later, also on his chest, in the form of numerous small moles. The new lesions resulted from local spread of his original melanoma. However, this time the patient refused all further treatment. 8 months later, a follow-up visit showed that the small tumors that had seeded the area were flatter and lighter in color. The patient permitted a small biopsy to be performed. There was pigmentation at the site, but no cancer. The following year, further clinical signs of healing were present. The immunologic findings were illuminating. 3 things happened. First, lymphocytes had attacked the tumor. Then, larger cells called macrophages literally helped to eat up the melanoma. Finally, there was an influx of antibodies that also participated in destroying the malignancy. This man's body had mobilized formidable immune resources to defeat the cancer. Spontaneous remission raises 2 important questions. Why, in some people, are such resources not powerful enough to destroy cancerous cells in the first place before the clinical development of melanoma? And what enables the immune system in some people to overcome this potentially deadly cancer even after it does arise? We have asked the same questions regarding the highly differing outcomes from one person to another of other diseases, despite the apparent similarities of the pathologies involved. In a series of 3 studies, researchers in San Francisco looked at the type C pattern of repressed negative emotion in melanoma patients. During an 18-month follow-up, they found a strong correlation between repression and the likelihood of relapse or death. Natural killer cells attack abnormal cells, thus providing a line of defense against cancer. NK cells have a demonstrated capacity to digest melanoma. As in breast cancer, they are less active in emotionally repressed individuals. One of the studies examined the thickness of the original melanoma in relationship to personality. Thickness of the cancer at first biopsy is correlated with prognosis. The thicker the lesion, the less favorable the outlook. Higher scores on the Type C melanoma coping scale were found to be associated with thicker lesions. Type C melanoma coping is characterized by patients' acceptance of having melanoma, having more concern for family members than for themselves, trying not to think about it, coping by perseverance, and trying to keep busy, keeping feelings inside, and being considered strong and capable of handling things. These San Francisco findings confirmed the conclusions of an earlier 1979 study that melanoma patients who had a harder time adjusting to the diagnosis, in other words, whose responses were less accepting and resigned, were also less likely to suffer relapse. Even rudimentary psychological support can make a difference, suggests a pilot study conducted at the UCLA School of Medicine by the psychiatrist F.I. Fawzi. 34 people with comparable stage 1 melanoma were enrolled in the experimental and control arms of the study, respectively. Fawzi's intervention was strikingly minimal. It consisted of only 6 structured group sessions over a 6-week period, with each session lasting 1.5 hours. The group meetings offered 1. Education on melanoma and basic nutritional advice, 2. Stress management techniques, 3. Enhancement of coping skills, and 4. Psychological support from the staff and from other group members. 6 years later, 10 of the original 34 patients of the group that had not received psychological support had died, and 3 others had had recurrences. In the support group, only 3 of the 34 had died, 4 had experienced recurrences. Earlier in the study, improved immune function had been demonstrated among the patients in the support group. It would stand to reason that people with melanoma and other cancers would enhance their ability to reverse the malignant process if they were helped to understand themselves and to become more self-accepting and assertive in their emotional coping styles. Harriet, a 50-year-old writer, is convinced that her decision to fight the cancer her own way, including with intensive psychotherapy, is responsible for the remission of the malignant melanoma on her right shin. I didn't trust doctors much. I did some research and found this alternative clinic in Tijuana. They treated melanoma as a whole body condition, which was the first thing I liked. Surgery on the leg and nothing to follow up didn't feel right to me. I went to Mexico, and they treated me with a whole series of things, including a vaccine, diet, tonic, and some herbal pastes that they used to burn it off the leg. I went back every month, and then 3 months and 6 months, but I started realizing that there was something wrong with the way I was handling things. For starters, I didn't have a GP in Canada. I resisted the authority of doctors, yet here I was, accepting treatment from doctors in Mexico. I thought at least I should get a GP, and that is actually when I met you. You didn't know me from Adam, but as soon as I mentioned melanoma, you said, "You know there is a psychological profile for melanoma patients, don't you?" Nobody had ever mentioned it to me before, but when you described it, it completely fitted the picture. You also told me that I should have the surgery and you could arrange it, but that surgery by itself might not help unless I also dealt with my inability to feel my own feelings and with all the other problems. So I did therapy for 6 months. It was very intense. After that, I had the surgery. The plastic surgeon was shocked to see me because he told me that the biopsy he had originally taken showed that I'd had invasive malignant melanoma, quite advanced, quite deep. He expected the worst. And yet, when he did the surgery, he found that it was just abnormal pigmented tissue, but no longer melanoma. I wondered whether it was the treatment in Mexico or the therapy Harriet underwent that had made the difference. Although I was unfamiliar with the details of the Mexican regimen, it had likely included the BCG vaccine to stimulate the immune system, an approach that, in some cases, has been successfully used against melanoma. Harriet believes it was a combination of everything. I do think that the treatment in Mexico was working, but the thing kept tingling. and I kept feeling there was something still there, a tingling and a darkness under the skin. What did you find out in therapy? I had to go back right to the beginning. My mother died when I was a toddler. I was the middle one of 3 sisters, all under 4, 2 of us in diapers. My younger sister was just 8 months old and very colicky. None of us got much attention, but what little there was, my sister got. We were shuffled around from place to place because my father was a traveling salesman. Within a year, he married somebody who looked a lot like my mother. She was the wicked witch of the West. She had her own problems. She was awful to us. Finally, she sent us away to a French-Canadian convent. She didn't like children. She was the eldest of 14 children and had raised all her younger brothers and sisters. She couldn't wait to get out of her home. She rose to be a secretary at the Canadian Embassy in Costa Rica. She was a very bright woman, but at 33 she was becoming a spinster. My father apparently asked every available woman in the English-speaking community of Costa Rica to marry him within the year after my mom's death, and they all said no. She said yes. She didn't want children, she didn't like children, but that was her pact with the devil. And my dad, he was at home 52 days the first year they were married. Here she was with 3 little girls who had all these communicable diseases, one after the other, quarantined. I certainly see her side of it. I remember copying out French poems and leaving them outside the bathroom door when she was in there having a shower. She never, ever responded to them. She never acknowledged them. So you were trying very hard to bring her into a relationship with you. Yes, and it never worked. My sisters were terrified of her. She locked herself up in her bedroom and would leave us with the maids. I remember when we needed something, and this is a scene that happened over and over again, the 3 of us would sneak up to her bedroom door and practice trying to say, Finally, after standing there for 20 minutes or however long it was, and not having the courage, not one of us, to say, Mommy, we would sneak away again. The sense was that we couldn't ask for anything. That's what I learned. I learned not to need or want, not to ask because it wasn't there. And when we did, we were ridiculed. One of my earliest memories is from around age 3 or 4, sitting in a dress by myself, playing with a doll. I was fine playing, but the sense was that there was no connection. There was nobody around. I was completely isolated.
Kid?
This was safe.
Who's a crazy foot?
There wasn't a sense of happiness, only that I had figured out how to protect myself.
No gravy.
By being alone.
Unsatiated kid.
By being alone, and yes,
Oh no, gravy.
without
jars
feeling
and
contact.
fuzzy.
There are other fragments that come up. For a long time I've had this image of lying in what felt like clouds. I was on a bed of clouds with a gray and colorless sky above me, and this one ray of sun hitting me. It was cold. The sense of really being completely alone, that even this ray, which might be love, wasn't. I saw that learning not to feel was what I had to do in order to survive. Such experiences, or the conclusions Harriet drew from them, left her isolated in life, or in relationships that, she felt, depleted her more than they nurtured her. Her intensive therapy was aimed at developing emotional competence. Emotional competence is the capacity that enables us to stand in a responsible, non-victimized, and non-self-harming relationship with our environment. See Chapter 3. It is the required internal ground for facing life's inevitable stresses, for avoiding the creation of unnecessary ones, and for furthering the healing process. Few of us reach adult age with anything close to full emotional competence. Recognizing our lack of it is not cause for self-judgment, only a call for further development and transformation. Pursuing the 7 A's of healing will help us grow into emotional competence. 1. Acceptance. Acceptance is simply the willingness to recognize and accept how things are. It is the courage to permit negative thinking to inform our understanding without allowing it to define our approach to the future. Acceptance does not demand becoming resigned to the continuation of whatever circumstances may trouble us, but it does require a refusal to deny exactly how things happen to be now. It challenges the deeply held belief that we are not worthy enough or good enough to be whole. Acceptance also implies a compassionate relationship with oneself. It means discarding the double standard that, as we have seen, too often characterizes our relationship with the world. As a physician, I have seen much human suffering. It may be futile, attempting to select one patient who has suffered in more ways than any of the others. Yet, were I pushed to such a choice, I know immediately which patient that would be. Her story never made it into any of the chapters in this book. Her illnesses would have put her in almost every chapter. I will call her Corinne. She's in her early 50s and has the following diagnoses: type 2 diabetes, morbid obesity, irritable bowel syndrome, depression, coronary vascular disease with 2 heart attacks, high blood pressure, lupus, fibromyalgia, asthma, and, most recently, cancer of the bowel. I have enough medication, Corinne says, that I don't have to have breakfast. I just have to take all the pills. There are 13 pills at breakfast time alone. Corinne was my patient for 20 years. Much of what I learned from her, and from my other patients who, like Corinne, shared their stories with me. As a child, Corinne experienced every sort of boundary deprivation and violation one can imagine. As an adult, she has been a chronic caregiver not only to her husband, children, siblings, and friends, but to anyone brought into her home. Until recently, saying no has been impossible. It is still painful even now, despite her dire health status and despite the fact that she can only get around by means of a motorized scooter. I see myself as a big blob. There is no shape. I can see people's auras. Mine looks black and gray, and there is no definition. It's like you're looking at someone in the fog, and you can sort of see part of an outline, but nothing whole. If you saw somebody else who had difficulty establishing boundaries, would you dismiss them as a big blob? No. I know several people who are overweight, and I don't classify them as big blobs. It's more my own self-image of who I am as a person. I feel like Jell-O when it comes to emotional things. So who's talking to me now? Is this the big blob talking to me? Is there no sense of somebody real at home? I guess maybe a little bit. I can't say 100%, no. Let's just look at that little bit then. The little bit wants to be in control and not allow other people to decide and make decisions for her without her consent. What more can you say about yourself? What are your values? That I don't sleep around, I don't cheat, and I don't lie, and I obey the law of the land, and I try to be the best person that I can be to other people. Is that only because you don't know how to say no, or is it genuine caring? It's both. The majority is genuine caring. So how can you say you're just a big blob? Because I'm Jell-O when it comes to saying no to my mother. Only a few days ago I couldn't say to her, no, it would be better for you to come in the summer, not now. I couldn't say that to her. I wasn't willing to make the decision. If somebody else told you that they had difficulty making such a decision, what would you say? I'd say that you have a lot of difficulty telling your mom what you want to tell her, and that you need to be stronger. Without necessarily telling them what to do, what would you understand about them? I would understand they're scared that if they assert themselves, they're going to be rejected. If you cannot say that about yourself, it's only because you are not paying the kind of compassionate attention to yourself that you would automatically grant somebody else. You cannot force yourself to say no if you don't know how to. But at least you can give compassionate attention to the individual who is having trouble saying no. Let's look at the bind you put yourself in, I continued. On one hand, you don't know how to say no. On the other hand, you condemn and judge yourself for not being able to say no. You end up calling yourself a big blob. With compassionate attention, you will see yourself as clearly as you see that other person, as someone who's scared. And you will say that not as a judgment, but as a compassionate observation. That person is really scared. That person is really hurt. I have, a hard time saying no, because that brings up the immediate risk of rejection. You can't force yourself to say no any more than you can force someone else to say no. But you can be compassionate toward yourself. I would hold someone else's hand to help them say no, but I wouldn't hold my own hand to help me say no. And if they didn't know how to say no, you'd still accept them. You'd say, look, I understand that it's really hard for you. You're not ready. But I don't say that about myself. I get angry at myself. The thing that would help you the most, I believe, is that quality of compassionate attention toward yourself. You can work on that. Will it give me back the energy that I seem to be feeling is zapped from me? So much of your energy goes into looking after others, and so much of what remains goes into self-judgments. Being this harsh on yourself takes up a lot of energy. The objective fact is that you're facing many serious medical problems. You are at risk, there's no question about it. I don't know how things will go. But with all that you have to deal with, the more compassionate you can be toward yourself, the more able you are to give yourself the best possible chance. Compassionate curiosity about the self does not mean liking everything we find out about ourselves, only that we look at ourselves with the same non-judgmental acceptance we would wish to accord anyone else who suffered and who needed help. 2. Awareness. All those seeking to heal, or to remain healthy, need to reclaim the lost capacity for emotional truth recognition, which is wonderfully illustrated by the neurologist Oliver Sacks in his book, The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. Sacks relates an anecdote about a group of aphasic patients responding to a televised address by then-President Ronald Reagan. Aphasia, from the Greek a, for not, and pha, to speak, is the loss of the ability to speak or to understand spoken language. It is the result of focal brain damage, as from a stroke. There he was, the old charmer, the actor, with his practiced rhetoric, his histrionisms, his emotional appeal, and all the patients were convulsed with laughter. Well, not all. Some looked bewildered. Some looked outraged. One or two looked apprehensive, but most looked amused. The president was, as always, moving, but he was moving them, apparently, mainly to laughter. What could they be thinking? Were they failing to understand him? Or did they, perhaps, understand him all too well? Sacks's aphasic patients were reacting to Reagan's unconscious expressions of emotion too. Tone, body language, facial mannerisms. They found his emotions incongruent with his spoken message. In other words, they saw through his dissembling, conscious or unconscious. They read the emotional reality, not the word reality Reagan was able to conjure up in his own mind, and that he was so adept at conveying to those who, like him, were themselves emotionally shut down. Either he is brain damaged or he has something to conceal, one of Sacks's patients said. Recall the words of Reagan's biographer. He feels the opposite of what he says. Animals and young humans are highly competent at picking up on real emotional cues. If we lose that capacity as we acquire language, it is only because we receive confusing messages from our immediate world. The words we hear tell us one thing, the emotional data say something different. If the two are in conflict, one will be repressed. In the same way, when a child's eyes diverge, the brain will suppress images from one eye in order to avoid double vision. The suppressed eye, unless corrected, will become blind. We repress our emotional intelligence in order to avoid an ongoing war with the crucial people in our lives, a war we cannot possibly win. And so, we lose our emotional competence, even as we gain verbal intelligence. Aphasiacs, it would appear, go through the reverse process. Much as a blind person will develop an extraordinary capacity to hear, the aphasiac develops an enhanced ability to perceive emotional reality. People are usually no better than chance at detecting lies from a liar's demeanor, even when clues to deceit are evident from facial expression and tone of voice, a group of psychiatric researchers reported in Nature magazine in May 2000. People who can't understand words are better at picking up lies about emotions. Full awareness would mean that we would regain our lost capacity to perceive emotional reality, and that we are ready to let go of the paralyzing belief that we are not strong enough to face the truth about our lives. There is no magic to it. The blind person learns to pay more attention to sound than the sighted. The aphasiac learns
Alright,
to
so that
notice
gets a
his
little
internal
reflected light
reactions to words,
happening in the
since
shadows
cognitive
of
parts
the purple
brain
figure
no
from
longer
the
tell
burning
what the
grass
message
fire
is.
ant scene,
Those
and a
internal
little bit of
reactions,
detail into the
gut
hornet.
feelings, are what we lost as we grew up. Clearly, we do not need to lose language skills in order to relearn
So
emotional
next I'm
perception.
going to move up to
develop
the
awareness,
sunflower and go
we do
around
have
it
to
with a
practice,
translucent
pay constant attention
petal
to our internal
patterning.
states,
For
and
a
learn to
second
trust
take here,
these
I'm going to end
internal
this clip
perceptions
now. Take two
more
coming
than
up.
what words. The pitch. Do the eyes narrow or open?
Take two.
Is the smile relaxed or tight? How do we feel? Where do we feel it? Awareness also means learning what the signs of stress are in our own bodies, how our bodies telegraph us when our minds have missed the cues. In both human and animal studies, it has been observed that the physiological stress response is a more accurate gauge of the organism's real experience than either conscious awareness or observed behavior. The pituitary is a much better judge of stress than the intellect, Hans Selye wrote. Yet, you can learn to recognize the danger signals fairly well if you know what to look for. In The Stress of Life, Selye made a compilation of physiological danger signals. He listed physical signs such as pounding of the heart, fatigue, sweating, frequent urination, headaches, backaches, diarrhea or dryness of the mouth. Emotional signs such as emotional tension or over-alertness, anxiety, loss of joie de vivre, and behavioral expressions such as unusual impulsivity or irritability and a tendency to overreact. We can learn to read symptoms not only as problems to be overcome, but as messages to be heeded. 3. Anger. I never get angry, a Woody Allen character says in one of his movies. I grow a tumor instead. Throughout this book, we have seen the truth of that droll remark in numerous studies of cancer patients. We have also seen that the repression of anger is a major risk factor for disease because it increases physiological stress on the organism. Not only does the repression of anger predispose to disease, but the experience of anger has been shown to promote healing, or at least to prolong survival. People with cancer who have been able to muster anger at their physicians, for example, have lived longer than their more placid counterparts. In animal experiments, the expression of anger has been found to be less physiologically stressful than the suppression of it. In rats who fight others when caged together, slower growth of tumors has been found than in more docile animals. Studies apart, we have seen that every one of the interviewees in the previous chapters acknowledged difficulties around the communication of anger, no matter what their disease or condition. The way my stepmother raised me, I think I'm not supposed to be angry, says Shizuko with rheumatoid arthritis. I was short-circuiting my visceral expression of anger, said Magda, with severe abdominal pain. Here the issue of anger becomes confusing and raises many questions. How can we encourage people to be angry when we see that children suffer from their parents' outbursts? In many of the patient histories, we have seen a similar pattern. A raging parent, a repressed child. Should Magda's father have suppressed his anger? I kept thinking of all the times my father raised his voice, said Donna, whose brother Jimmy died of malignant melanoma. I remembered his voice and the screaming and the yelling, and I thought, this is not how you should live. This is not what we should have experienced. On the surface, it seems like a paradox. If the expression of anger is good, Magda's father and the father of Jimmy and Donna were only acting in a healthy fashion. Yet the effect of their anger was corrosive to their children's self-concept and health. Suppressing anger may have negative consequences, but should we encourage its expression if it harms others? The mystery only deepens. Not only is the unbridled outpouring of anger harmful to the recipients or bystanders, but it can also be deadly to the one who rages. Heart attacks can follow upon outbursts of rage. In general, high blood pressure and heart disease are more likely to happen in persons who harbor hostility. A study of nearly 200 men and women conducted at the Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, Baltimore, in 2000, found that hostility and a drive for dominance were significant independent risk factors for coronary heart disease. A great volume of research has connected hostility with high blood pressure and coronary disease. As we can readily deduce by now, the relationship between rage and cardiovascular disease is also a function of the psychoneuroimmune apparatus. The sympathetic nerves are activated in rage states. Narrowing of the blood vessels occurs with excessive sympathetic flight or fight activity, increasing the blood pressure and decreasing oxygen supply to the heart. The hormones secreted during the stress response in rage states raise lipid levels, including serum cholesterol. They also activate clotting mechanisms, further heightening the risk of blockages in the arteries. It was blind rage, I was sure, that had gotten me into this fix with my heart, as well as genetics, wrote the journalist Lance Morrow in his memoir of heart disease. The blind rage that later triggered Morrow's heart attacks was the volcanic eruptions of the anger a child learned to repress in his family of origin. How then to resolve the dilemma of anger? If the expression of anger is harmful, and so is its repression, how do we hope to attain health and healing? The repression of anger and the unregulated acting out of it are both examples of the abnormal release of emotions that is at the root of disease. If in repression the problem is a lack of release, acting out consists of an equally abnormal suppression of release, alternating with unregulated and exaggerated venting. I had a fascinating conversation on these two seemingly opposite ways of coping with Alan Calpin, a physician and psychotherapist in Toronto. He points out that both repression and rage represent a fear of the genuine experience of anger. I found Calpin's description of genuine anger surprising, even as it rang completely true to me. His explanation made me realize the confusion in our commonly received ideas about this emotion. Healthy anger, he says, is an empowerment and a relaxation. The real experience of anger is physiologic experience without acting out. The experience is one of a surge of power going through the system, along with a mobilization to attack. There is, simultaneously, a complete disappearance of all anxiety. When healthy anger is starting to be experienced, you don't see anything dramatic. What you do see is a decrease of all muscle tension. The mouth is opening wider because the jaws are more relaxed. The voice is lower in pitch because the vocal cords are more relaxed. The shoulders drop, and you see all signs of muscle tension disappearing. Dr. Calpin's mode of therapy works along the lines first developed by Dr. Habib Devanloo of McGill University, Montreal. Devanloo made a practice of videotaping his clients during therapy encounters so that they themselves could see their bodily manifestations of emotion. Calpin, too, tapes some of his psychotherapy sessions. In a tape of one of my clients, he describes powerful surges of electricity going through his body, and he talks about them as they're happening. But outwardly, he's just sitting there describing it. If you're watching the tape without the sound on, you'll see a person looking quite focused and quite relaxed, but you wouldn't necessarily even guess that the person was angry. If anger is relaxation, what then is rage? When I am in a rage, my face is tight, my muscles are tense, and I am sure I look anything but relaxed. Here, Dr. Calpin makes a crucial distinction. The question is, what do people really experience when they experience rage? It's fascinating to ask people. If you really ask, the majority of people will describe anxiety. If you ask in physiologic terms, what are they experiencing in their body when they feel rage? For the most part, people will describe anxiety in one form or another. It's true, I said. Tightening of the voice, shallow breathing, muscle tension are signs of anxiety, not anger. Exactly. Their anger is not physiologically experienced. It is only being acted out. Acting out through bursts of rage is a defense against the anxiety that invariably accompanies anger in a child. Anger triggers anxiety because it coexists with positive feelings, with love and the desire for contact. But since anger leads to an attacking energy, it threatens attachment. Thus, there is something basically anxiety-provoking about the anger experience, even without external parental injunctions against anger expression. Aggressive impulses are suppressed because of guilt, and the guilt exists only because of the simultaneous existence of love, of positive feelings, says Ellen Kalpin. So the anger doesn't exist in a vacuum by itself. It is incredibly anxiety-provoking and guilt-producing for a person to experience aggressive feelings toward a loved one. Naturally, the more parents discourage or forbid the experience of anger, the more anxiety-producing that experience will be for the child. In all cases where anger is completely repressed, or where chronic repression alternates with explosive eruptions of rage, the early childhood history was one in which the parents were unable to accept the child's natural anger. If a person unconsciously fears the power of his aggressive impulses, there are various forms of defense available to him. One category of defense is discharge, by which we regress to an early childhood state when we dealt with the intolerable buildup of anger by acting it out. You see, the acting out, the yelling, the screaming, and even the hitting, all that a person does, serves as a defense against the experience of the anger. It's a defense against keeping the anger inside where it can be deeply felt. Discharge defends against anger being actually experienced. The other way we can avoid the experience of anger is through repression. So repression and discharge are two sides of the same coin. Both represent fear and anxiety, and for that reason, both trigger physiological stress responses, regardless of what we consciously feel or do not feel. The paralyzing difficulty many people have with anger toward loved ones is illustrated repeatedly in the interviews we have seen. Jean, unable to tell her parents about being molested at age 11, idealizes her relationship with them rather than acknowledge her anger. Her husband, Ed, has a corrosive resentment toward what he regards as controlling behavior from his wife, but cannot experience anger openly and directly. Jill, with ovarian cancer, is upset with her doctors for having missed the diagnosis, but not at her husband, Chris, for having failed to notice her pain and weight loss over several months. Leslie, with ulcerative colitis, swallowed his anger toward his first wife. No question about it. I couldn't fight because then she would say, "You see, this is a bad marriage." He is delighted to find himself in a marriage now where the experience of anger does not threaten the relationship. The anxiety of anger and other negative emotions like sadness and rejection may become deeply bound in the body. Eventually, it is transmuted into biological changes through the multiple and infinitely subtle cross-connections of the PNI apparatus, the unifying nexus of body-mind. This is the route that leads to organic disease. When anger is disarmed, so is the immune system. Or when the aggressive energy of anger is diverted inward, the immune system becomes confused. Our physiological defenses no longer protect us, or may even turn mutinous, attacking the body. It may prove valuable to regard cancer less as a disease than as a disorder in the body's biochemical signals, writes the psychotherapist Luis Armont, who has worked with mobilizing people's anger in group therapy with cancer patients. To alter these signals is to produce an impact on the body's immunological defenses. It would follow that any form of intervention designed to restore the body to physical health must use more than physical means. Since emotions dramatically influence the biochemical system, one way of providing immunotherapy is by giving psychotherapy to patients. People diagnosed with cancer or with autoimmune disease, with chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, or with potentially debilitating neurological conditions are often enjoined to relax, to think positively, to lower their stress levels. All of that is good advice, but impossible to carry out if one of the major sources of stress is not clearly identified and dealt with: the internalization of anger. Anger does not require hostile acting out. First and foremost, it is a physiological process to be experienced. Second, it has cognitive value. It provides essential information. Since anger does not exist in a vacuum, if I feel anger, it must be in response to some perception on my part. It may be a response to loss or the threat of it in a personal relationship, or it may signal a real or threatened invasion of my boundaries. I'm greatly empowered, without harming anyone, if I permit myself to experience the anger and to contemplate what may have triggered it. Depending on circumstances, I may choose to manifest the anger in some way or to let go of it. The key is that I have not suppressed the experience of it. I may choose to display my anger as necessary in words or in deeds, but I do not need to act it out in a driven fashion as uncontrolled rage. Healthy anger leaves the individual, not the unbridled emotion, in charge. Anger is the energy Mother Nature gives us as little kids to stand forward on our own behalf and say, "I matter," says the therapist Joanne Peterson, who conducts workshops on Gabriola Island in British Columbia. The difference between the healthy energy of anger and the hurtful energy of emotional and physical violence is that anger respects boundaries. Standing forward on your own behalf does not invade anyone else's boundaries. 4. Autonomy. Illness not only has a history, but also tells a history. It is a culmination of a lifelong history of struggle for self. From a simple biological perspective, it may appear that the survival of the physical organism ought to be nature's ultimate goal. It would seem, however, that the existence of an autonomous, self-regulating psyche is nature's higher purpose. Mind and spirit can survive grievous physical injury, but time and again we see that the physical body begins to succumb when psychic integrity and freedom are jeopardized. Jason has been an insulin-dependent diabetic since he was 5. Diabetes mellitus derives its name from the Greek for sweet urine, for in this disease, excess sugar is filtered by the kidneys from the bloodstream into the urine. In diabetes, the gland cells of the pancreas are unable to produce enough insulin, the hormone required to help sugar from digested food to enter the cells. Apart from the immediate physiological risks of high glucose levels, diabetes involves potential damage to many organs of the body. Now 23, Jason is blind in his right eye from diabetes-induced vascular injury. He also suffers from weakened cardiac muscles, a leaking heart valve, and malfunctioning kidneys. At times, he is unable to walk, owing to a reversible nerve inflammation called diabetic neuropathy. Jason and his mother, Heather, were my patients for about 10 years. In the past 12 months, he has had to be rushed to emergency repeatedly for medical crises, including heart failure and meningitis. He may not have many more years to live. According to his internal medicine specialist, his prognosis is guarded. Heather is in a chronic state of anxiety and exhaustion, mingled with resentment, which she believes are due to Jason's stiff-necked refusal to take care of himself when it comes to eating the right kinds of food, paying close attention to his insulin requirements, attending medical appointments, and having a healthy lifestyle. Of course, for a mother, the stakes are high. Her experience has been that when she does not take charge, Jason becomes ill. She has lived many years with the very real possibility that were she to relax her guard, even for a day, Jason could end up in a coma or worse. His most recent hospitalization followed a several-week bout of vomiting that left him weak, dehydrated, and in convulsions. Heather was by his bedside one day when Jason had another seizure. Nurses, residents, and specialists came running, she relates. Jason's eyes were rolling backward and his arms and legs were shaking. They were injecting medications through the IV in his arm when he sat straight up, opened his eyes, and looked straight at me. In a loud voice, he said, "Let go!" "But I can't let go. I will not let my son die." Jason does not recall the incident. I must have been really out of it, he says. Any idea what you might have meant? I ask. The first thing that springs to mind is just to let me go. My saying let me go would not have meant to let me die, just stop being so overbearing. Let it go. Let me do what I'm going to do. It's my life. I'll make my mistakes, but my mom has got to let me do that. Being diabetic and having somebody else try to control me has been such a large part of my life. Whatever his mother's motivation, and no matter how much he has manipulated her into taking care of him, Jason's salient experience is of a lack of autonomy. He has had no capacity to assert himself openly. His yearning for an autonomous self and his anger toward his mother have taken the form of resistance, including resistance toward his own physical health. It was always like suffocation, he told Heather. No matter what I did, it seemed to be wrong. When I said let go, it would have meant just back off. Let me live the way I'm going to live. I'm going to live my way, and of course I'm going to make mistakes. Everybody does. I never felt free to make my own mistakes. If there is one lesson to draw from the history of Jason and Heather, as from all the personal stories and all the studies we have considered in this book, it is that people suffer when their boundaries are blurred. By treating Jason all his life like a child for whom she must assume all responsibility, Heather has helped to hold him back from real personhood. By reacting like a child, Jason has held himself back. In the final analysis, disease itself is a boundary question. When we look at the research that predicts who is likely to become ill, we find that the people at greatest risk are those who experienced the most severe boundary invasions before they were able to construct an autonomous sense of self. In 1998, the American Journal of Preventive Medicine published the results of the Adverse Childhood Experiences, ACE, study. There were over 9,500 adult participants in this research project. Childhood stressors
over
like
here.
emotional or sexual abuse,
I think that does it for the moment.
violence, drugs, or mental illness in the family were correlated with adult risk
Alright,
behaviors,
so
health outcomes, and
I
death.
adjust the
There was
aperture a
a
little.
strong graded relationship between
Yes,
dysfunction
maybe
in
it
the
was a
family
little
of
dark
origin
there.
and
But
adult
anyway,
health
as you can see,
status.
that begins to
That is,
develop
the greater the
reflected
exposure to
light
dysfunction
into the
within a
shadow
child,
of the purple
the
figure.
worse the health status was in
A little
the
bit of
adult,
highlight
and the
developing
greater
into
were
the deep
chances
darks
untimely
of the
death from
bald-faced
cancer,
hornet.
heart disease, injury, or other causes.
The
Most
second
commonly in
aura
the lives of
layer
children, boundaries
around
are
the
not so much
sunflower.
violated as simply
And the
not
next layer will
constructed
be
in the
slightly
first
more
place.
translucent
Many
until it
parents
fades.
cannot help their
Probably
child
2
develop
more layers, maybe
boundaries
just 1, I'm not
because
sure.
they themselves
And
were
then
never
some
able to do
detail
so
on the
in
boatman.
their own formative years. We can only do
Just the water,
what we
really.
know. Without a clear boundary between himself
Okay,
and his parents,
so that does it for the
child
moment, I think.
remains
Thank you for watching.
enmeshed
That's Adam
in
Sturch
relationship.
broadcasting from the Mushroom Mansion
That
Taos, New
enmeshment is
Mexico.
later a template for
Working
his
on
way
oil
of
painting
connecting to the
contact.
rest of the world. Enmeshment,
Have a good
what
night,
Dr.
Earth.
Michael Kerr calls a lack of differentiation, comes to dominate one's intimate